name's Wayne Fiden. I'm Planning Director here in Hampton. I just want to give a very quick background, and I'm going to introduce the Nelson Nygaard team. But the reason we're doing this is Hampton does a lot of individual planning projects, individual engineering projects that are related to transportation on both Main Street and King Street. So DPW is right now working on designing the intersection of North Street and King Street. And the planning board is working on, will be permitting the People's Bank, which is on the corner of Barrett Street and King Street, and dozens of other individual projects happen by themselves. And what we need is sort of an overall vision on where we want to go on King Street. Not that we can necessarily do that all at once, but we want to have an overall vision of what's important, what kind of street do we want King Street to be, what kind of street do we want Main Street to be, and then individual projects that follow will hopefully all build towards that vision. There may be, those of you who have been here for a long time, King Street was rebuilt last 24 years ago. So there may be a time, hopefully, when we rebuild all King Street, and that puts the vision all together in one place. But between now and then, there'll be lots of individual actions. So we got a grant that was related to the state hospital. The state's concerned that many communities, including our own, are discouraging development in sensitive areas for good reasons. But they're worried that the collective result of discouraging development in bad areas is we're not encouraging development anywhere. And jobs are leaving the state because employers can't find housing for their employees. And so the state's basically financially rewarding communities who are encouraging new development in pedestrian and walkable areas. We did the state hospital development, so the state gave us a large grant to encourage that, and that money the city's using to address the consequences of development. And the biggest thing we heard here in public hearings about development is the traffic impacts. So it seemed like a perfect opportunity to take some of the money we got from the state hospital, a very small percentage of the money from the state hospital, and hire Nelson Nygaard. So I will introduce Jason, let you introduce your team.
Thanks, Wayne. I'm Jason Schreiber with Nelson Nygaard. We're a multimodal transportation planning firm. This crew here is based out of our Boston office, and we have offices all around the country, which gives us sort of a unique perspective on what people are doing in communities large and small in different places. We do a lot of work overseas as well, and it gives us a kind of a perspective on what are the best practices and what kinds of things are succeeding. This charrette is designed over 3 days to really go from more or less ground zero to a pretty solidly defined conceptual product that hopefully the community can use to help guide subsequent planning ideas that go forward. And really day one here today has been our what we call needs assessment or examination or listening phase. We're here to get as much input as possible. We had a discussion first this morning. A number of folks went out with us walking the corridor. We've taken a couple hundred pictures. And we're just doing peak hour traffic counts down at the main intersection of King and Main Streets. And tonight, it's still about that feedback. We're really trying to understand what all the problems are. We're beginning to think we know without looking at in detail at all the numbers where the issues lie, but we really want to hear from you. And for us, that's a form of education about what to address and what to fix. Which is why up front, these boards are here for some of your markup. We'll be taking your comments. We've already taken a lot of comment, and I'm going to walk you through the corridor in a little bit and let you tell me whether we're getting the problems right. Tomorrow, we're going to then try to come up with as many ideas as we can that smartly solve those problems, and then refine them on Wednesday with a final presentation Wednesday night of what those ideas might be. Tomorrow's a studio session. And in that case, as we're developing these ideas in plan and concept and cross-section, we would encourage people to drop in and make specific comments or ask folks who weren't able to make it here today to do so. In the morning, we'll be in the City Council chambers in City Hall, and all afternoon we'll be in the planning meeting room across from the planning department on the second floor of City Hall. And then tomorrow evening will be, is it back here again? To just have a poster session, more or less, with where we're going, and you can tell us whether we're going the right way. Now, part of today has been giving us an education to know what to do. We wanted to run through 2 quick 15-minute presentations from Rick Chelman, who's a professional engineer, and myself to share our perspectives of what we've been educated on around the country. to sort of get an understanding of what works in other communities like this and some of the lessons learned that we've seen that may be most applicable here to Northampton as we go forward on Main and downtown and King Street. Without further ado, Rick, can you start off?
Thank you, Jason. I'm going to give you a relatively brief presentation, as Jason mentioned, trying to talk about a little bit about where we've gotten to where we are in New England and just the difference between mixed-use development that I heard quite a bit of discussion about this morning and what's happened more recently in America and why it keeps traffic engineers such as me very busy. We used to know how to do things like create place. This is Vermont. Because we had to. Before the advent of the automobile, things basically had to be in walkable confines. And if you didn't provide mixed-use walkable places, you didn't make a place. And that's why a lot of the places, both here and in Europe, that many of us like to visit on vacation and whatnot, feel good as pedestrians because they were designed at a time when that's really the only option that was available. I don't read my slides. Thomas Jefferson has a great quote up at the top that is with respect to classical architecture, but it's also, I think, something we can learn from historic, nice places that we visit. Modern architects don't like to do that. They like to do something brand new every time, and as a result, when they're making urban places, they often don't do a very good job. Now, from an engineering perspective and a transportation perspective, if you look at these two diagrams, which are the same, imagine this one on the left. These are the zoning codes. So this is residential, school, apartments, Jiffy Lube, McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, you know, you name the use down front, and the mall. There are books, these are the books, called Trip Generation, the ITE publishes, that tells me with pretty good precision how many car trips will come across that driveway, that driveway, that driveway, and that driveway, because if you want to get from any one of these uses to another, you have to get in your car, drive out to the big road, and drive to each individual use. The more classical Northampton downtown networked streets and mixed uses behaves much differently. You can still drive from one use to another, but you'll find that you don't need the big road to make the connections. You can actually make some trips on foot, and you can make some trips by bicycle as well. So those are the books. In England, they drive on the wrong side of the road, so they have to put down striping to tell you which way to look. And in America, we have, this is a two-lane street from Los Angeles. It's 56 feet wide. So that's how you have to stripe that sort of crossing. I've done a lot of research on why, because as an engineer, I found that often when we're not the same firm, planners like Jason and engineers like me, there's some sort of tension that I didn't really understand a number of years ago. And it's just basically different schools of education. But when you get back into the records of AASHTO and its predecessor, AASHO, before they put the T in it, you have to be very careful how you pronounce that. This term, over-designing, I was surprised to hear because it's actually a very incorrect term to use. You either design something appropriately or you do not design it appropriately. The planners are also complicit. This is, as you can see, a Harvard publication. And if you get back into the late 1940s and 1950s records, you'll find that civil defense, planning for a nuclear event, and planning for cleanup after a nuclear event were very fundamental and built into a lot of the planning, subdivision regulations, and street design standards, both from the planners and the engineers. But by the way, that's an unphotoshopped image, that bomb slide. I didn't do anything with it. I should mention, those are quotes from the book. This is good planning because one bomb can take out so little. And this European city is bad planning because one bomb can take out so much. Original design vehicles. You'll also find a lot of signs like this internationally where people are concerned with vehicular speed. In downtown Milwaukee, when cars first came downtown, the city council set a speed limit of 8 miles an hour. And within 1 month, there was a petition to reduce it to 4. And people know that speeding is a problem, but they don't know some of the reasons why it is a problem. And for example, at 20 miles an hour, you can stop a car at about 100 feet, whereas at 40 miles an hour, it takes almost 3 times that. More importantly, if there's an accident involving a car and a pedestrian, and that car is going 20 miles an hour or less, the pedestrian is usually not permanently hurt. And if that car is going about 36, 37 miles an hour and above, they're usually killed. So as you drive around looking at your speedometer, pay attention and see where you're driving at potentially dangerous speeds. I live here in Portsmouth, and you'll hear planners talk about the 5-minute walking radius, quarter mile, which some show as a circle like this, some show it as routes that you would actually travel along the street, and that is the quarter-mile walking radius imposed on Portsmouth. Those of you who don't know it, and does everybody know Portsmouth? It looks, I think, pretty good. Pretty high density, you know, about 10 units to the acre around the downtown. Nice sidewalks. That's infill. That was a parking lot 6 years ago. Got some pretty narrow streets. The South End neighborhood, this is Tobias Lear, who was George Washington's chief of staff. His house is here. And this neighborhood hasn't really changed in close to 300 years. I don't know how the fire departments over the time have managed to keep this neighborhood the way it is, but they have. And that is a two-way street with very high-end housing fronting on, you know, what's about a 14-foot street. Our streets of variable width, especially this winter. This is my son's elementary school, and anybody within a mile is expected to walk to it. And that again is the downtown. The downtown also functions as a park once area. Just like here, we have a municipal parking structure as well as on-street parking. But the pattern of behavior for the people who arrive by car is to come, park your vehicle one time, patronize many different locations, and then depart, as opposed to suburbia. Jason will talk about this in a little bit more detail, where it's basically you park everywhere, which encourages additional driving. So lots of pedestrians, and that's low-income housing, and I see many folks with mobility impairments going farther than the quarter mile to get to the good coffee shop at Market Square. So in reality, what I found from having studied and paid attention to downtown Portsmouth, it's more of a 10-minute walking radius because of the quality of the pedestrian environment. Many people, I live right there, not just my Uber walking family, but all of our neighbors commonly walk downtown. It's very supportive of that travel behavior, and walking is a form of travel behavior. However, look right here, just outside that radius, and it's only 1 mile from Market Square to this. Here's the same 5-minute walking radius theory around this center that looks like this. So what happens out here, again, we've reversed same colors, red for vehicle, yellow for walking. People drive in, park here, go to the liquor store, park here and go to the grocery store, park here and go to the drugstore, park here and now it's closed, used to get movies, and go to the dry cleaning. It's a park-a-lot environment. So it's really about a 30-second walking radius, just because of the way the physical environment is so much different. It encourages a lot more traffic generation. And that's the 30-second radius down in Market Square, which is obviously absurd. Now, from a traffic perspective, when this really gets interesting, if you do assemble things in a mixed-use walkable manner, you generate a lot less traffic. For some California developers, I did a cordon analysis, which is put the traffic counting tubes around the downtown and measure traffic coming in and out for 2 weeks. And then using assessor's data and aerial photographs, broke down into all of the land uses in the downtown into what the ITE calls land use codes, those big green books I showed you right after about the third or fourth slide, and compared if we took those same land uses and stretched them out on King Street in a suburban manner versus had them in the downtown, these were the results. On a daily basis, it generates less than half as much traffic. And on a peak hour basis, it's only about 30 to 40% as much traffic. Those are huge reductions, especially in your peak hour traffic conditions. This bustling little place is Peoria, Illinois, in the 20s. That's what it looked like 2 years ago. It's two-way street here with transit and just a gazillion pedestrians. When we were working there on a downtown enhancement plan, we were sort of wondering how and why did it get from that to this? Because it's, even a tumbleweed doesn't feel comfortable on this street. It's a one-way street. The city had adopted as public policy to encourage through traffic, 40 to 45 mile an hour speeds, encourage truck traffic, and it just, literally decimated the downtown. There they are side by side. So if you do value the pedestrian, the bicycle, and whatnot, and establish policies in that regard, it can have long-term effects, just as the reverse is true. Big international issue, the idea of making complete streets. I would posit that today most of Main Street in Northampton is about the car and the truck, and perhaps not so much about the other walkers and bikers, and you've got a lot of space to make use of there. So urban streets are very difficult design issues, even when you don't have somebody, I'm not happy that you took his photograph on the bicycle, because when you're trying to make an outdoor room, basically, which is what a great urban street is, you've got many, many factors that are all competing for the space between this building and this building. Whether it's these people seated here, cars, bikes, it's all, you got to find the right balance, and it's all about trade-offs. This is a little project up in Vermont in South Burlington. A typical subdivision in most New England communities might have maybe 2 street types. To get what we're calling a new urbanist place, this little South Village project, it has 6, 7, 8 different street types, and it's only about 300 units. So the streets make a big difference, even on a small project like this. In Abu Dhabi, we helped the Emirate create a new urban street design manual, looking worldwide, and I think the most important outcome from that effort was that as a matter of Emirati policy, this is the order in which you are to consider prioritization on every urban street in Abu Dhabi. And given how it is today, this is a big shift. Bicycles are very important, and obviously bicycle riders vary considerably in skill and ability. This This is a Sharrow. Not sure if you have Sharrows yet in Northampton, but and cycle tracks. Some Photoshop. Steve Price out of Berkeley does these. He's quite skilled to show how you might change areas and how you can take something like this. That's a photo that we shot in Portsmouth, Virginia, and how just by adding buildings and details, it's a very different place.
Can you say something about the cycle track? Is that just an extra wide sidewalk for the bicycle lane, or is that on the street?
This is up at the same level as the sidewalk. The curb line would be here. And those have proved very popular in many locations recently. In Abu Dhabi, the capital city streets will have lots of them, for example. And they seem to be gaining traction here as well. They're very good for through movements especially. And a downtown like here on Main Street, I don't think you need them, but perhaps in connections on King Street, places like that might be an interesting thing to think about.
Are they two-way bicycle or one-way?
One way.
One way.
One way each side.
Each side.
What's the total width?
Oh, they vary about 5 feet.
It's nice because you're less likely to get bored because
Exactly.
people getting out of the car are usually getting out on the passenger, on the driver's side, because most people are driving a car with only one person in it. So having it on the pedestrian side of the car is appealing to somebody that rides a bicycle.
And this is St. Louis last year, a quick road diet that we did. 4-lane street, South Grand Boulevard. Used to have some really, it still has good bones and has a lot of good ethnic restaurants that actually had places for outdoor seating. But because this 4-lane road had become a commuter cut-through with pretty high speeds, they weren't using the outdoor seating. It was too loud. It's just not a pleasant place to be outside these restaurants. That's what it looked like. Pretty high traffic volumes. Well over 20,000 cars a day. Had some issues because when you have even numbers of lanes, left turns are more difficult than they are with odd numbers of lanes. We proposed curb bulb outs, which I think Jason will be talking about that here quite a bit. And so and to make it into 3 lanes. We modeled it in what's called sim traffic to see how it might perform as a 3-lane road as opposed to a 4-lane road. We thought it would work. The Public Works Director thought we were insane. And being Missouri, the show me state, he said, okay. And in one night, literally one night, his crews restriped it from 4 lanes to 3 lanes, put out Jersey barriers to simulate the curb extensions, and put up a variable message sign saying, the next message was, if you don't like this, call this number. And it wasn't my cell phone, but it might as well have been. Despite that, this is like textbook. You do not surprise drivers like this. Despite that, you can't quite read this, but that's the percentage who liked it, and these two thought it was a great success or success. It was well over 2/3, and it's under construction. So it is possible to effect quite a bit of change, even when you have a Public Works Director, not that you do here, but it was an amusing exercise that has been validated.
So I'm going to try to project that thinking in a few other places and summarize some numbers that I think are pretty important when we start talking about the areas that we're discussing here. And the reason you're seeing a road diet is it does have a lot to do with what seems to be obvious about King Street in our minds, but it's there because there's a lot of numbers behind it. And frankly, it's interesting to think about what Main Street might be able to be as well. As Rick already pointed out, a street that's too big causes speeding, and the fatality rate as speeds increase really goes up dramatically. And the difference between 20 and 40 is life and death, literally. So another key factor here, though, is also the width of that street. And that was part of the lesson to come out of a place like South Grand in St. Louis. At that point, at about 44 feet, or about as tight as most people would do 4 lanes of travel, above that, really, the fatality rate can increase dramatically. Seattle, for years, has gone through a relatively scientific process to assess this change from 4 lanes to 3-lane cross-sections. And essentially, they've done a road diet, which is, as Rick showed in South Grand Boulevard, a change to a center turn lane, which usually also has the advantage of extra space for, in this case, bike lanes or maybe on-street parking. If you look at these numbers, what's interesting is that in every single one of these conversions from 4 lanes to 3 lanes, the volumes went up. ADT, average daily traffic, went up. Every one of them went up. But note to the right, the collisions went down dramatically because people are going slower, there's more controlled expectations. And what you have today, as far as I've been able to observe it, and that's why I want to hear back from you very shortly, is not a lot of predictable expectation on King Street, nor even on Main Street where things are much slower. I'm going to quickly show you what 3 of those look like. A smaller street, slightly greater volume, and then 45th, which is about the same volume as King Street. That's what Greenwood Avenue looks like. A mix of uses, a little bit of strip side type of commercial, and they took the 4 lanes to 3 lanes. This is Dexter Avenue. It's a new growth area in Queen Anne, and again, they dropped it down to the 3-lane cross-section, and they're continuing to see infill development today. And this is 45th Street, which is at 20,000 cars a day, and in a very vibrant commercial district, has been part of what has made that commercial district successful. A lot of it has to do with, curb extensions and reducing the crossing distance for pedestrians. But so much of it has to do with rationalizing the numbers. And this is something to think about when we look at a nice, easy to drive on street and a congested street. When we start to measure these things, the level of service, if you've heard that term, the delay for a driver and their experience on these roadways, here is great and there seems to be horrible. But it depends on how you measure things. Because for an economist, it may be the other way around. Because the reality is this is a lot of business. And this is the kind of thing that may get people to actually walk between businesses and start to change how we measure success. And that's part of why communities are recognizing that as you fill up space with cars, you may not be making the most efficient way for getting people around. And if you can kind of squeeze them all together onto a bus, you have room for 10 times as many buses, or at least 5 times as many bicycles. And that type of measurement, these numbers are people per lane per hour. In a car, don't work out so well. But when we start thinking about these other modes of transportation, you start to measure the success of your roadway strictly on level of service for vehicles, you may be missing the picture of your community. And this is what Rick was referring to. And this is a traditional roadway corridor in almost any community. And it could very well be King Street. And what happens on King Street is, like so many other communities have, a variety of uses, each of them with their own parking lot. And our experience when we go out into this community, say for instance I'm driving in and dropping my daughter off at school, and then I drive over to work at Cole Morgan, and then I spin back and pick her up at school, and then I drop her off at the soccer field, and then I go over to Stop and Shop to pick up groceries, and I come back to the soccer fields to pick her up, and then I head out of town. What that has created at each and every one of those T's is a turning movement. That is the source of traffic. And this is what happens in traditional strip-type development where you've got a sprawl of activity. But what's amazing in terms of the numbers is if you create the right kind of connectivity, the exact same numbers in the exact same book cannot model this. They cannot model the basic reality of a mixed-use district where I might be able to drive in and park at one spot and walk to work while my daughter walks to school. She can walk to the soccer field, I can walk to the grocery store, and she can come back and meet me and we drive home. And in that case, those are only the two turning movements we made on that roadway, and this is the difference between your downtown and what King Street is today. And the key here is half the parking area and the land area and only a quarter of the arterial trips, which are the volume that causes traffic and the turning movements that cause delay, and of course the vehicle miles traveled. So these lessons that are done in community after community in America are not very well proven by the books, but they're proven by lots and lots of data. I mean, auto ownership declines as you create denser walkable neighborhoods. Driving overall declines as you create more and more density and activity, and that's what you find in Northampton the closer you get to the downtown. Another key lesson about that is connectivity, and that's something you have. On the left here is 1 square mile in Irvine, California, and on the right is 1 square mile in Portland, Oregon. On the left, every single one of those intersections is level of service F and high congestion. And on the right, nothing is beyond a level of service B or C, one of the most connected downtowns in all of America. The right kind of connectivity that allows traffic to be dispersed, but you to get out of your cars and walk and connect around. I quickly threw up what a 1 square mile with King Street and Elm Street and Main Street in downtown might look like in Northampton. And you have the fine grain that's getting there that allows for that, especially the closer you get to downtown. But as you look at places like King Street, you start to wonder what could happen out there to be able to continue to advance that kind of connectivity or not. Another key thing about that diagram, the animation I showed you earlier, is that if you're not really controlling the parking management and each and everybody has their own parking lot, and you're forced to do all that driving, there's a lot of circling for parking that goes on. And that's a big part of the congestion we get in our downtowns. It's oftentimes, in many places, at least 30% of the traffic, and some of these studies suggest up to 3/4 of it. Did you realize that just getting rid of 10% of the traffic volume at almost any intersection in the world that is congested is the difference from going to congested to free flow? It's only 10%. And if at least 30% of your volumes in your downtown are hunting for parking because everybody needs to drive and they're not comfortable walking in more remotely, then you're literally causing a lot of the problems you have in your downtown. And we start to recognize that we need to be more efficient about sharing the resource of parking and its impact on overall land values, recognizing that this makes money and this is the kind of thing we want to visit, and this provides a lot of tax base and employment to live in our communities, and the bedrooms are things that we're trying to maximize affordability of, but typically we don't collect an ounce of rent for these parking spaces. We need to think a lot about the equation and the performance of what goes on in our communities and what we're really trying to encourage when we provide free parking. This is an example of a community really not much bigger, if at all. I have to check the numbers. Boulder, I think it is bigger, Boulder, Colorado, which once upon a time was down on its luck and had a very difficult downtown that wasn't succeeding, and they chose to change their future by completely taking the constant provision of more and more parking spaces for downtown businesses out of the equation. They said to the business community, we're going to stop building these big garages and let the business community take a look at the books. And the business community immediately learned that it was much cheaper to pay everybody to ride transit for free than it was to build another $20,000 or more parking space. And that equation caused dramatic changes because instead of investing in parking garages, the downtown in Boulder was able to invest in multi-use path systems that got folks around by other means. They were able to really encourage biking and walking and create the bicycle facilities that have things like bike sharing. And the key is the success. As soon as they started those programs, drive-alone rates began to plummet. Transit usage began to escalate. All of those buses that run around Boulder, Colorado are almost entirely subsidized on parking that was not constructed, on payment that folks would have otherwise made on parking leases or the debt service on their own parking garages. to the Regional Transit Authority, in their case RTD, to give them all these wonderful buses that run around downtown, and each of those employees has that pass for free. So how do some of these ideas apply here? And that's really what the rest of this session is about here today. We want to talk a little bit about places that have tried to do these changes and investigated different ways of making their downtowns work. I'm going to show you a quick example of what we might be trying to evolve over the course of the next day or two. This is Medford, Mass. It's a very traditional downtown, in many ways not very dissimilar from Northampton. This is their main square. They've got a lot of development on the west side. They've got a lot of development on the east side. This is that east side that it's got more of the, the quick pizza shop kind of activity. There's some good facades, but there's not a lot of connectivity. This is the west side that it's harder to get to, where there's a lot of thriving new restaurants that are opening up, but they're separated by this big intersection. And this is the core of the square. And that space is actually a barrier to getting around. It's a barrier to the downtown. We actually started doing this work as part of a parking study to see whether they should be building a parking garage, but we quickly looked at measuring another metric. Not the traffic volume, not the parking numbers, but actually, well, wait a minute, this intersection. What's the delay, the level of service crossing this intersection? And we determined that the perception of delay getting across this intersection was so high, multiple lengths, multiple ways, and frankly, my opinion of a few of the intersections in Northampton where you have at least this much crossing distance, and the folks just were having a hard time getting to the other side of the square. And we simply said, well, can you, through a different approach to this intersection, recognize that you can handle just as much traffic volume by bringing in the curbs, by running this in the models, and by actually improving circulation. We took one of the one-way streets and made it a two-way street. And this kind of approach actually sort of transforms the ability for folks to get around the neighborhood. They used to, before, only be able to walk within this red radius from this proposed site for the parking garage that we were originally hired for. And by changing that intersection, they were able to extend that radius across that intersection dramatically. And guess what was out here? Tons of empty parking lots that nobody wanted to use, and that were now suddenly within a 4 or 5 minute walk max. And what happened with that community was they looked at their downtown and said, instead of building an $8 million parking garage, we're going to spend $1.5 million on curb extensions and signal changes and really make a walkable place that buys us a parking garage for free. The trade-offs, when you think about normal forms of transportation and development, are pretty significant because we don't normally measure these kinds of things. Economic development and quality of life measures, the environment and social justice are kinds of things that traditional transportation, traffic engineering really doesn't include as a metric. And in particular, in a community like Northampton, it is so important and fundamental to understand the dollars and cents of the reality that we're all facing in America. Because over here, in most of America, transportation, if you were to hold across all these pies, housing costs even, is a big quarter of what the average household has for outlay. But if you are in an environment that's walkable and or transit rich, the additional amount of disposable income that folks can have in those communities is part of what enables us to live more affordably, is part of what enables us to get around. And the percentage that transportation cost has on communities is absolutely dramatic. This is a quick graphic of Minneapolis-St. Paul. I don't have that for this region in particular, but everything in white, if you only looked at housing cost, is the most affordable places to live around Minneapolis-St. Paul. But as soon as you add in transportation cost, you suddenly shrink that circle dramatically. You make it very difficult to afford large parts of that metro region. Here's the same thing in D.C. Only in dark blue is it really expensive housing. But as soon as you filter in the transportation cost, you wipe out all of that outer region that seemed to be the affordable place to go. So we need to think about our transportation policies of, housing at the hospital as opposed to closer King Street or downtown, for instance, because that lesson is being learned painfully by the thousands who live in suburban Washington, D.C. and think that this was the housing cost they were going to get, cheap and free on the outside, and that's the housing cost in reality they're getting with their transportation bundled in. So this is a quick just teaser of the discussion we're going to now have. And what I'm trying to get from all of you, based on these ideas that we've been talking about, is here you are at the very end of our study area at State. This is State, this is South, this is Elm heading into Maine. You know, this intersection, and I'll show you a bunch of the slides and the pictures we took, is a lot of pavement. And we did a quick idea of, okay, could you shrink this up? Could you really make this thing work a little bit differently? I know you may have seen in the fall, this bike lane actually, and bike box actually got temporarily striped in the fall. Can this work just as efficiently? We're hoping, when we look at the numbers, that something like this can work more efficiently. And we're going to work hard to see if this type of a treatment here or at other locations can have a similar effect. What I want to hear is from all of you about whether those kinds of things make some sense. Now, I have here, this is the corridor view, which is the same thing that's over on those two tables over there. And what I want to do is walk through this from that State and Elm intersection here, slowly through. And I'm going to tell you what I've seen. Shout out and yell at me if what I'm saying makes sense to you or not. So when I look at this, obviously, you know, I already pointed out how this might be able to be a tighter intersection. But this is, to us, a big gateway between downtown and Smith and residential neighborhoods that is dealing strictly with vehicles, really, more or less. And I haven't heard anybody who thinks this is a comfortable place to walk. Now, those previous slides where I showed it all brought in, does that seem threatening to anybody in the room? Is that a problem? Does that immediately give you a knee-jerk reaction of no, don't do it?
The bike lane didn't make sense to me when it was in existence, because you had the one strip that was sort of just like a car lane but more narrow, but then you extended it to be able to be in front of all the cars, which didn't make any sense on a bike. And it's really scary to go in front of a car turning left when you're on a bike, because that, I think it's also important to keep in mind that different intersections are more friendly to certain, you know, obviously like downtown Northampton is more pedestrian friendly than here, or bike friendly.
Right.
People are used to going through whatever they want, but on a bike. So that's tricky. I don't think that was a solution that would work.
There are cars on both sides.
Right, there are cars on both sides of it. It's interesting, that's known as a bike box. And a bike box is strictly there as an option to a cyclist to allow you to get ahead of the queue. It's like a queue jumper for a bus, to get ahead of the queue and get to decide to turn left. You can choose to use it or you can choose not to use it. Many folks in the bicycling world have really been advocating for those as an option. I also have spoken to cyclists who absolutely love that as well. And you know, it may be the right solution, it may not be the right solution. I think the key is that it's hopefully optional.
I like having both. I'm a cyclist, I don't own a car, and I like having the option of a bike box because finally after about 40 years here, I lost my fear of the cars at that intersection. I figure as long as the drivers can see me turning left, they, you know, I hope won't run me over. And if there's a bike box, I have that option. Other people will really find that intersection intimidating, and I can understand that. You can, you know, there are other options.
Yeah, typically a bicyclist on the green can accelerate off the line just as fast as a car can, and because you're going to turn, it's a slow speed. So it's actually a good spot to get out in front of them.
I work a little bit in Forbes Library, so I come off of West Street, I guess onto Elm there, and then take a left onto State Street, which I've done many, many hundreds of times. And so I always want to get on the outside of the left turning lane in a bicycle so that I wind up near the curb on State Street as I come down onto it. The problem with that in the present situation is that the cars really aren't expecting you there. There's sort of when you show up next to them, between the two cars, they don't know that they don't know why you're there, they don't know how you got there, and they don't know what you're going to do. So having a defined space that would allow me to be there and would say it's okay for this user to be in that space, I personally would like it.
So you like the bike lane being there to...
I like the
let
bike
them
lane
know.
being there, yeah, to let people know that I have essentially a right to be there.
The way it was done was outside of the right turn lane so that you could continue straight, but it wasn't outside of the left turn lane only because there's not a lot of width without actually ripping out the median, which is why the bike box was there so that you could at least maybe go over if the signal was
Meander
red.
over there, right?
Right. But that's a very good point.
Yeah, I was just wondering how you deal with the fact that, you know, you have at least two different kinds of bike riders in this world. I mean, they're the ones who do it all the time and are really good at it and know how to maneuver through traffic. And then there are the ones who, even if they do it a lot, they're basically chicken, like me. And, you know, they'll take the sidewalk because it feels safer.
Right.
And it's not necessarily safer for the pedestrian, and it's not. I'm just wondering how you can, I mean, when you design for the experienced bicyclist, that's one thing, and how do you take account of the fact that probably more than half of the people using bicycles aren't in that category?
Yeah, and that's where, you know, if you get into bike design, there's a lot of theories on what the right thing to do is. And unfortunately, for the longest time, the United States had a very much a, they call it the motorist bicyclist, the vehicular cyclist mentality, which was, okay, you know, we should be able to bike with the cars at all times. And it wasn't, given our road conditions in the U.S., a very easy way to invite people onto bikes because we're competing with cars. And that's why you've started to see bike lanes and exclusive facilities evolve, which in many European cities you don't have, but you don't need them in many European cities because the cars are already going slow and it's confined. And you'll actually find in the best practice places where we've learned to install these facilities that come out of Amsterdam and Copenhagen and what have you, cycle tracks and bike boulevards and all. That's actually outside of their downtowns. That's connecting regions. And that's part of the philosophy now, which is that when you're going to leave the downtown and connect somewhere, an exclusive facility is a good idea. And right here, you're sort of at that transition point. And I would hope that as you get into the more walkable, slower downtown, you don't actually need an exclusive facility, because in Europe, they won't do that because the streets are already so narrow, you can absolutely take the lane and work very comfortably or go up on what is usually much wider sidewalks as well. And that is a philosophy that is starting to be appreciated more in the U.S. because a bike lane does add more width, and that whole width equation I spoke about earlier means more speed for cars as well. But where the cars are already going a little fast, then it's okay. Let's get the bike lane in there. Let's give them the safe space or the cycle track.
Well, that raises the question about whether slowing the traffic there would solve the problem for everyone.
I think it's really about how slow you need to get it. In other words, that death number of 20-25 miles an hour is typical of a real slow downtown kind of street. King Street, as an example, it'll be hard to get all the cars to be going under 25 miles an hour. I think at the point we are, that's wonderful. I think right now, given that you get folks going over 50 sometimes on King Street, we're a little far away, and that's probably a good location for a protected bicycle facility. But someday, wouldn't it be great if King Street was narrow, you didn't have to worry about that, at least from a cyclist and safety perspective. This is where we have to start evaluating the trade-offs as I walk up King Street, because you got to move cars on King Street. And that was the same debate that Seattle went through when they took their 20,000 car a day 4-lane King Street and dropped it to 3. And there was a lot of friction there, but they did it for safety, and it actually handles even more volume than it did originally. Sir, you had your hand up?
I don't know how to do the trade-offs. It was complicated, but I like the Abu Dhabi approach, or pedestrians first. That was my way I would rank it for Northampton. As a person who walks a lot and has 2 kids, I would put the pedestrians at the top. My kids take bikes and I ride a bike too. But I still feel, to me, when I think about safety, and Northampton is a very walkable community, I think of the pedestrian coming first. And I was a little disappointed in the work that was done at Smith, because I think it really was addressed to the bicyclists, almost more than the pedestrians. So I'm not sure how that gets resolved, because I think it's important to have very safe routes for bicyclists too. But if I had to rank things, or look at my input tonight, I would say go with Abu Dhabi.
And I think that's it's always a tough thing in design to come up with what the right treatment is, but if your approach is pedestrians first, if you recognize that even the motorist becomes a pedestrian, of course the cyclist has to get off the bike and the transit rider has to step off the bus, that is the first and foremost form of transportation anywhere. And oftentimes making your shopping district work better for people who could do nothing other than drive has to do with making it easier for them to cross the street to the shops on the other side, to be able to walk a couple doors down so you can share their parking supply. So it all has to do with making the walking better, and that's a very good point about Elm Street up by Smith College as well, or anywhere we go, is that pedestrian priority is a very important type of focus for many communities. Feet first is a term I'm hearing a lot in the United States. Any other thoughts, worries about this location code?
One tiny quick thing that I'm just realizing now is that just the point in question where the bike box was, there's 4 lanes of traffic right there.
Yeah.
And I can't really think of anywhere else in Northampton or anywhere I would ever want to be on a bike in 4 lanes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's part of the issue, is that it's confusing enough for drivers even.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for me, while I can understand if more people got used to the function of the bike box, it could work. I think for me the issue here is more about the fact that there's 4 lanes,
right.
And that is
it's
just
intimidating, right? Right.
And it goes from 4 to 2 to 2 to 1. It's like.
It is definitely something we'll try to look at, is do we need all that cross section? We're not going to be able to do a real engineered analysis, but we have some of the numbers here. We'll be able to run some, rough guide that says, okay, do you really need all that storage? But, it is designed in a different era. That was really about getting the cars through there. Can we redesign it correctly? Well, that's part of what we're here to do today. But I agree, 4 lanes seems like a lot.
Now, can you just comment briefly on the use of roundabouts as a way to slow traffic by moving, and where is appropriate and where isn't?
Roundabouts are one of the safest forms of intersecting known for practically every mode except for the bicycle. There's a lot of debate about whether they're good for bicycles. As you may know, the one that was just built in Amherst actually has ramps to get the bikes up on the sidewalk for those who are feeling unsafe in the roundabout. If it's a slow-speed roundabout, it generally shouldn't be a concern for cyclists. I think the other debate about roundabouts is that they are really, first and foremost, a traffic solution. They work wonderfully at merging traffic flows safely, and part of the reason why they're very safe for pedestrians is because the cars are going slow and they're going to yield to the pedestrians. So the numbers, again, how you measure it in terms of crashes, are very good. I think when you start to measure it in terms of utilization, they may not be as good because of the space they take up, and for a pedestrian, the deflection from what is otherwise a nice, quick, straight path. In fact, the one at Amherst every night is overrun by students just walking straight across it on the old alignment of the roadways because there's no traffic at night, and they just walk straight. You can see it every night. And that's recognizing that pedestrians really try to walk on the most efficient routing, and a roundabout requires you to walk all the way around it. For a recreational stroll, for an occasional stroll, very safe intersection. For an urban area like this, it may not be the best thing for the pedestrian connectivity. So looking at a compact intersection with very short crossing distances is also a good approach. Other thoughts? Go ahead, sir.
Well, I don't know where this fits in, but I have trouble as a cyclist and as an aging cyclist. I have trouble with the bike lane concept because they all seem to lead you on and then dump you somewhere you don't want to be. What I do like about the bike design in Northampton is the bike path that runs from Taco Bell and basically does an inner city loop and brings you out under the South Street Bridge, because it gives you a lot of access points to downtown where you want to go, and that makes a lot of sense to me as to whether that principle could be built on. I mean, I would put a lot more bicycle parking along that corridor, and sort of direct people, and then you walk up to Main Street and come down. I wonder if there are ways to switch back up behind the library, or Smith. I don't know, who owns what, but that's my thought about it.
I think Smith is actually trying to look at just that question right now. I believe you're absolutely right. It's sort of like the bicycle freeway, and the more on-ramps you can get into the downtown would be great. It is very neat in that regard. In places, in cities I know that have downtown multi-use paths, they're always very heavily used for circulation to a certain set of blocks that'll get you to where you want to go. Because the bicycle can often be the fastest way to get around the downtown. So you're right, it's a very good approach. Other things I'm missing here, thoughts before we move on. We've got a lot of corridor to talk about, and it's 8:10. We're technically to go to 9. If you're all ready and willing to stay till 9, that's great. We'll get through it all. If you need to go, let me know.
I would hate to see all that infill be just paved.
Be just what?
With this specific intersection, I think you showed the median expanding.
I don't remember. It was actually, I think we showed it, but we showed more. Yeah, I think it was all.
I guess my 2 cents would be.
You'd hate to see it all concrete. I'm with you.
Yeah, that's it.
All right, so we're marching southeast as we go here on Main Street. So there's South and the Academy of Music, and we're heading around the corner here in front of City Hall. I know, for instance, that there's been ideas about how this can be narrowed up a little bit because there's a lot of dead space here. And one thing that we were noting when we were out there today was the access to this parking lot is just a one-way that is sort of not even known. I mean, I've sort of known it's there, but I've never driven in that way. I've always just gone in here because it's such good access. And this is a great plaza for something else, but the key is this is a tough sight line. So we talked a little bit about, can you extend the curb out here and make this crosswalk a little bit safer? And the point was, that's a tough sight line issue. There's also been discussion about how does this cross-section get used? Is it 1 lane? Is it 2 lanes? It ultimately becomes 2 lanes at certain times, but sometimes it doesn't feel like 2 lanes. There were 2 lanes here. Are there still 2 lanes here? Oh, wait a minute, there's 3 lanes. And the whole cross-section in here, as we continue on Main Street, has a little bit of that confused environment about it. And then, you know, you've got crosswalks where people are kind of coming out from behind cars or buses. There's only 2 crosswalks in this stretch. This intersection, as we said, has got similar difficulties. And then, what else was the other things that came up in here? Oh, a lot of comment about how actually in this stretch where we were talking about what you could do here, the sidewalk actually narrows down a little bit compared to the rest of that side of Main. Those are what I saw. Other things?
Yeah, there are several restaurants on the north side of Main Street there that have very narrow sidewalks in front of them, and some of them try to put tables outside, and you can barely get 1 row of narrow tables. And given the width of Main Street, that seems like a really logical place for a much wider sidewalk, where you could make much better use of. Those restaurants would benefit a lot from being able to have more outdoor seating, and if you slow the traffic down, it may even be pleasant to eat out there. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that's no question something that has been done in lots of communities to great success. There was a recent reconstruction of Santa Monica Boulevard in California, and that's exactly what they did. They took, their 4-lane street and really, really calmed it down. It carries 40,000 cars a day, so they still have 4 lanes, but they put in a beautiful planted median, really, really widened the sidewalks, and completely changed the nature of what is otherwise a California high-speed street to actually a linear walkable corridor. Where I used to work in Cambridge, Mass Ave was decreased from 4 lanes to 3 lanes through Central Square with the exact same thing. They literally just built a new curb and infilled it with the passive restaurant zone, and very recently they've been permitting more and more of those, and they've been an amazing success. And the sidewalk is still there in front of the business to get through, and then the passive area is buffered by the cars, and it's just been a huge success. And Cambridge and Boston is now doing the exact same thing.
You might clarify how many lanes there are on Main Street.
I don't know.
A couple of things. I agree with the sidewalk, it'd be nice if it was wider, but one thing is you miss the snow most of it, but I think you need to think about the street all year round, because it changes a lot from summer to winter. I don't know what DPW others have told you about snow, but it's this year, because of all the snow, it was an issue, and just, of course, people don't sit outside as much in the winter, so those are, it'd be nice if it could be programmed for year-round activities that would change. The other thing is there's the possibility of an alleyway network in Northampton doesn't really relate to what you're doing, but you might want to think about it now when you draw the plans. If it's possible, some alleys connect some businesses. I think with some encouragement in design, there's the potential to enliven or to use some of those back spaces even more, either for pedestrians or outdoor gathering spaces. One of the nicest spaces I found recently is the space between the garage and the Thorns where we have this market once a week. It's just a kind of leftover space, but it's really nice and it's behind. But it seems that people have found it and they go there. It's just a pleasant place. I think there's options or opportunities for other things like that.
The side streets off of Las Ramblas in Barcelona or something. I mean, obviously the alley model works really, really well in lots of communities. Rick showed an alley that's practically a street earlier.
One particular positive factor from the fusion of this corridor of one lane, 2 lanes, and pedestrian lanes is that it forces the cars to go much slower than they're technically allowed to go through this corridor. And I think for many drivers, I know myself included, the rare times I have to drive through this section, it feels, like you're constantly waiting for somebody to jump out in front of you, bikes do crazy things, and cars suddenly appear out of nowhere. And it makes you on guard. And my fear would be if we make this one lane continuous both directions, that people would have the ability to drive this much faster through that space.
Well, if you made it which way?
One lane that was a very clear experience, then people would be permitted to perhaps go a little bit faster because they know what to expect.
So if you channelized it as opposed to have the open street plan?
Yes.
Interesting. I mean, it's an interesting discussion to have. As you go to the next section, for instance, where it's really even wider, and I look at these crossings and the experience that you regularly see pedestrians have crossing there, I'm unsure of the value of the chaos because it really is threatening to a pedestrian. Now there is a whole theory of the chaos design for intersections, places that literally pull out all the signs, pull out all the stops, pull out all the controls and make a shared street more or less. But anywhere where I've seen that done, it's probably 1/3 the width of Main Street. And what is really getting the driver to slow down is the visual cues of friction, of whether it's parked cars or pedestrians or bikes or planters or what have you that gets them to slow down. And the visual cues that slow a driver down in Main Street are not as much friction as it is fear of crashing into a car. And when I think about other modes of transportation, a bicyclist through here is probably not thinking that it's as safe as it is as a motorist might think. The motorist knows they go slow, they're going to get through there. A cyclist may not have the same perception. And I do know that what I see going on at these crossing walks, which is a double threat, which is essentially that one car may yield to you, but the next car may not realize why you've slowed, and that happens again when you try to cross the next leg of the street, is really not conducive to, hopping across the street for lots of folks. So I know exactly what you're saying because I would support that in the right cross-section. I'm not sure that this is the right cross-section. I think it's a little big for that. I think the chaos works for cars avoiding cars, but when it gets to other modes, I'm not sure.
Just to underscore one thing Jason said, if you're trying to cross this crosswalk and this car has yielded to you, this car can't see you. You can't see it. And even a car right behind that car might tend to want to pull around and pass. So what's this person doing? Why have they stopped? And a lot of pedestrian accidents happen that way.
That's actually one of the two comments I want to make. If you make it one lane, you increase the likelihood that everybody is being seen by the one car. But so there's that. I don't know, again, it gets back to, how much of the traffic flow you're compromising. The other thing for me that I'm wondering if you're looking at is for bikers, the parking here.
Oh yeah, a few folks mentioned that. There needs to be more bike parking. In fact,
I don't see that.
You said they want more.
Car parking. When you're a biker going down there,
yeah.
I mean, when a car is parked in a parallel spot, there's an anticipation that they have to think about the door opening and waiting for you. Here, I feel like I have to slow down so much because anybody can be backing out any time and not seeing it. Yeah. It's an act. I can't believe we don't have more accidents from it. People are obviously doing some of the precaution that they need to do, but is there a
Yeah, so I think this has come up before. So here's the skinny on street parking. In the state of Massachusetts, Mass Highway will no longer allow head-in angle parking. It is silent on the subject of reverse angle parking, which we all know is experimented with in Northampton, and I can show you a long slideshow on that as well. Parallel parking is the most difficult on-street parking maneuver. It is, in theory, safer because you're supposed to look in your mirror before you door a cyclist. And it's, somewhat space efficient. It has a lot of traffic effects when you can't get around the parallel parking car because it takes somebody fairly long to parallel park, on average 10 to 15 seconds. Reverse angle parking actually has a ton of benefits if you have the space, which you do. I'm not advocating it, I'm just simply saying that in reverse angle parking, where the driver is situated, if they're parked, is to look left and see the bicyclists and all the cars before they exit. And that actually backing into that space takes less time than anything other than driving into a head-in space, which you back out of very scared. So the experiment in Northampton for reverse angle parking failed because it was just these 8 spaces that were reversed and nothing else, which is the worst experiment imaginable. It doesn't work that way. Whether or not that's something you do in the future, you just have to look at about 100 and growing number of communities around the United States that have been doing reverse angle parking successfully for decades. So oh, go ahead, sir.
A couple more details about the crosswalk. I've heard that double effect from the parents on the thing, wondering about how this works. But one thing I was thinking, this photo shows that the width of all the crosswalks is approximately the same. Is it any safer if you have, like maybe what you did at Smith, have a wider crosswalk at some locations because the visibility, cars stop, the angle isn't cut off so much when you see other people crossing. So that may be potential there, I don't know, but also I think it may be more useful just to kind of encourage people to cross maybe in certain places and differentiate between different crosswalks. The other thing about this photograph, which is just one of my total pet peeves, I've stopped writing it to the newspaper about this. You don't see the crosswalks for 3/4 of the year in Northampton. They're just obliterated. Whatever we're using doesn't last more than 6 months. So I would say, could we have brick or another material that will endure, maybe with some paint along the edges, but the paint does not make it here.
Yeah, the paint doesn't make it anywhere in New England. The materials are either when the road is constructed, you do something called an inlay tape, which becomes part of the asphalt, or you quickly put down on relatively fresh pavement something called thermoplastic, which bonds right to it and is a solid hard crust. But both are much more expensive than paint, which is why paint is frequently used. If you actually do a life cycle cost thing, you'd find out that thermoplastic is cheaper in the long run because you don't have to replace it as frequently as paint. But our annual budget cycle, you can't suddenly triple the cost of your markings. And on old pavement like you have here, thermoplastic wouldn't work. So maybe when it gets repaved, when there's a large road project, that's one of the solutions. Brick is usually not great because brick in New England heaves, and suddenly it's actually the worst place to walk, ride, and certainly roll a wheelchair. Many places have been doing stamped asphalt, but again, that requires a repaving. It's not quite as visible as the bars, but if in a slow-speed area, it may not be a bad intervention. There's also colored asphalts. Again, it's a repaving, but they're more or less permanent, some of the mixes that are out there. But yeah, you said originally making it longer. It's all about the driver's perception of what they see. Longer crosswalks helps. Some form of a stanchion or signs that say this is a crossing place help. At night, having your lighting pedestrian scale and not light up the universe cobra head scale really, really helps, especially when where there's a crosswalk, you focus it on the crosswalk and you have the pedestrian spaces lit because the cars have headlights. Why do they need huge cobra lights? So there's all sorts of those types of measures that can be used to increase visibility of those locations.
A big part of the problem still seems to stem from the overall width of the street.
Yeah.
And it just seems to me that that creates multiple possibilities for opportunities and solutions. I mean, widening the sidewalks being one of them, putting in a median of some kind to make the crossing safer, and also to provide a place, if you design it right, so that I mean, what we have in the winter, essentially, is we have a snow mountain median.
Right.
But if the median could be designed so that you could still put the snow on it in the winter, then, I don't know, I mean, I don't know if that's part of the thought process, but since the double threat of the two lanes of two cars lanes coming at you, if you could deal with that through that sort of combination of techniques, the seamless of, that would slow the traffic, it would make it safer, it would give you a resting place when you're crossing, it would maintain the snow storage capability. It seems like that combination of things would help.
And I think everything you're suggesting is something we're going to try to look at pretty detailed during studio tomorrow. So you're welcome to come throw in your thoughts as we deal with this cross-section in particular. Everything about wider sidewalks, cafe space, bump outs, even reverse angle parking saves you 3 feet per side of the street. There's an extra 6 feet. And then the median is a good discussion. If we have to keep 4 lanes, it is a good place to have refuge, even if it's not a constant median in pockets, at least where there's crosswalks. We'd love to see if you really need it. We're going to try to see what the numbers say if you actually do need 4 lanes. Many folks have said it's got a lot to do with the signals and queuing from the signals, though having looked at State and Elm, which I already know doesn't work very well, and just having done a lot of counts at King in Maine, where I watched a lot of wasted time in the signal, there may be opportunities to tweak them, but not necessarily enough to get rid of 4 lanes. It would be great if you could. So we'll be looking at all of that. The snow storage thing is a good comment. You know, in communities that have these busy downtowns, you know, removal is a big part of it. And where do you put it before you do the removal? Those extra down here plaza spaces may be the good place for it. When you put it on the median, it actually makes a lot of those crossings harder because you don't even see the pedestrian at all until they've popped out from behind it half the time. I saw a great image of that where the snow was up to here and it was like a hole. Other thoughts?
I know you already said this, but there's a serious shortage of bicycle parking downtown, and I've taken pictures of 20 bikes strapped to 2 small trees. It's pretty amazing in the summer when people really start biking a lot, how little there is.
Have you seen some of the urban park, what's the name of the urban parks movement? I can't remember, where they take over a parking space for a day. There's actually been in some communities permanent on-street parking now for bicycles. So, you know, trade off 1 parking space to put nice, 8 really nice bike racks is probably a good trade-off. Now we're heading into that intersection that I love. I think you could take that 30-second walk circle and have it almost fit within the intersection. My observation as you get here is this. It works because it is so scary to cross any of those approaches at any other time because you don't know what's going on. There's a split phase going on both approaches, but there's no overlap on this approach, so there's a consistent expectation on 3 of the approaches, but the 4th approach has a permissive left and not a split left, and as a result, when cars are going to move where is not incredibly predictable, and it varies by time of day. And having watched people try, who think they know the intersection, just for a half hour today, to go out and cross other than when that walk signal is up is risky at best. I mean, people think they got it and then they don't, and they have to be retreated, which is why the scatter zone crossing works. But man, every single cycle I watched, there was somebody just standing there like this. Oh yeah, the walk comes up, now I can go. And imagine the one time that somebody forgot to hit the button. They're like, what's going on here? And really what this signal operation works as is the pedestrian's last line of defense. It's basically saying, we've given up this whole thing to the car, it's designed for the car, it's massive, there's 5-lane approaches, we're just going to, okay, squeak the pedestrian in now and then if they happen to hit the button. And then we all cross obediently. I'm hoping there's a better way to deal with this intersection. I've seen intersections that I believe handle this kind of volume that are about half this size, that have you know, large curb extensions on the corners, that even if they have similar levels of vehicle storage, they've maybe taken out the right turn lane here, or they formalized the protection for the parking here and significantly reduced the crossing distances. and as a result been able to significantly reduce the cycle time so you don't have to wait so long, and very frequently introduce the concurrent crossing that comes up parallel to the traffic depending on the left turning volume. And at the very least it may be a location to have that walk come up all the time if it wasn't such a long signal cycle length and at 2 a.m. somebody would be hammering their head, why am I sitting here waiting in my car when there's no pedestrians? But it's a place to really look at. That's really, to me, one of these. The only reason that's not a bigger barrier is because you're lucky to have so much activity on the far side that people do want to get across. But in other communities, this would be the end of your downtown. You just shut it down. You wouldn't go past there. So you're fortunate that there's still draws on either side. And I would argue this intersection has a lot to do, and especially this cross-section, with why it may be harder for success as you start to head north on King Street from a business perspective as well. Other thoughts, things that I'm not hitting on when I say that, or your criticisms of what I've said? Let's start with you. I haven't heard you in the back.
It is a long wait there, but I walk around town a lot, and I actually don't have too much of a problem with it, because I feel like it's the only spot in town that you have to wait as a pedestrian. I was wondering if you if there's any way to do any pedestrian education, or maybe you consider some type of signal. Not that I'd be a huge fan of that at the other crosswalks that you were talking about before, because I feel like that's a big problem with the traffic in town, is that people just send it. And Main Street is very pedestrian friendly, so cars stop as soon as somebody walks in the road. But there'll be times where you're waiting as a driver for a long time, and there's just a stream of people going across those other crosswalks, and I feel like that causes backups in the middle of Main Street often, especially with cars turning on and off of Crafts Ave and such. You know, you get stuck all the time around there.
You know, there's two interesting discussions that come out of that. One is strictly from an engineered perspective. You know, communities like Portsmouth, for instance, where all the streets are two-lane, where things are skinny, where there's tons of crosswalks that are unsignalized, people just pretty much only have to walk 20 feet, get across the street, and the cars barely stop. Whereas here, you've got such a large cross-section, you've got people stopping 2 lanes away from the pedestrian before they hit the median sometimes, because they're trying to behave well as drivers. But if the streets were skinny, there wouldn't be that issue. The whole interaction time would be like that. The whole theory of making this intersection for cars work more efficiently is to squeeze it down, the cars interact more quickly as opposed to getting across. So that's an engineered solution that is worth considering if we could actually make the streets smaller. You wouldn't have those kinds of delays. But then the other debate is, you know, what are our priorities when we start talking about, who is it here who said, you know, prioritize the pedestrians first as well. And many would say, let those cars wait. Just let them wait. The downtown works. It's not the end of the earth, and we're really trying to encourage walking. And, you know, if we have to keep 4 lanes, what can we do for certain kinds of measures? Usually a signal is something of a last resort. If it's working safely right now, which as far as I know, most of those crosswalks down on the core of Main Street, it's working safely now, then you probably wouldn't go to that extreme because it typically would slow things down a little bit, but it's a possibility.
So just basically kind of a quick yes or no answer maybe. So what you're saying is with the long phase for people to walk across the street, that a single pedestrian creates a long delay for traffic, right? So if it takes me 25 seconds to walk across Main Street, I've essentially been a traffic obstruction for 25 seconds.
Or some portion of it, depending
on how you're dealing with it. But at some point in the road, I've been obstructing traffic for the entire amount of time that I've been walking across Main Street. If you grant that there's going to be pedestrian vehicle interaction on the street, that in some measure narrowing the street and shortening the amount of time that people are walking across the street actually reduces the amount of obstruction that pedestrians are creating, and then causes traffic to be able to flow more smoothly because people are spending less person minutes walking across the street.
You said that far better than I need a business card in mind.
Okay, so one of the things, I mean, this is sort of a general commentary on this whole thing, is I think that people have been afraid to work towards a possible future for someplace like Portsmouth or downtown Portland, Maine, which I've also seen, sometimes Providence, Rhode Island in certain areas, that somehow people believe that we can't have that here. And from what I've heard so far, I would really like to have something come out of this process that makes us believe that we're good enough somehow to do this. Because I think we are. I think every metro area has some place like Northampton where you can get a vegetarian burrito, and the places that make the best of it make those places for really say, we're going to make the pedestrians first. Our possible future, when you move towards a future like this, is a great one. The possible future where we sort of go along and make everything work the way things have been working is a pretty good future, because Northampton's a pretty good place, and by just virtue of the colleges, it will be. But you know what? Make the streets narrower.
It's a very good and interesting point. You know, it's funny, I'll just throw this out there. A business's perspective may be more timid than even you're suggesting folks in Northampton might be, because the traditional role for business in communities like this is, you know, get the cars moving, get them in and out, get them parked, get them moving. And the irony is that businesses in these congested downtowns that are doing this, Boulder and Pasadena and Ann Arbor and what have you, are actually succeeding at far greater rates than ever anticipated. Because if you really think about it, you know, where is the big economic engine hotspots in Massachusetts? They're all where the traffic is. It's a sign of success, actually, is traffic. I'm not saying we want to be stuck in delay, but Northampton, in the western part of the state, has got one of the more congested downtowns. It's also one of the most successful downtowns. Boston, of course, Newburyport, where it's hard to get around, Rockport in the summers, Nantucket, oh my God, disaster. There's more dollars generated per capita there than you can imagine. So to some degree, congestion tracks success, because congestion is an indication of people coming. So it's, you know, it's a vice. It's something to not make bad, because congestion is pollution, but it's also, you know, when more people want to come, to some degree inevitable. Look at Manhattan. In the back again.
One particular, I would be a little saddened if in this particular intersection we were to allow people to cross with traffic. And the reason for that is because I cross this intersection daily by walking, and this is one of the joys of my day, I think. It's the time for that 25 seconds where the cars have to wait for me, and we get to take over the intersection. And on Friday and Saturday night, it's actually something that's a joy to watch, is to come and you hear the boop boop, and
especially when it's warm out.
people cross.
Yep, I know what you mean.
I think the danger here is that people who aren't from the area don't know that they shouldn't be walking across with traffic. They're not permitted. They have the big red hand. They cross the traffic, you know, the cars don't expect them. And that, I think, is where you get a lot of attention. So I would rather see us focus on, I don't know, some sort of educational promotion around that intersection rather than changing it.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Here in the front, I haven't heard.
I was just going to also about people crossing there. A lot of people don't follow the signs, and when you're in a car, they can be real holdup. I mean, you're sitting there stuck in the middle of the intersection thinking the light's going to change on you. Somebody's still strolling across the road when they're not supposed to. And I think we've tried education a few times, and it's just human nature.
The human nature is that you don't want to stand and wait.
Yeah.
And you know, some people obviously don't mind the wait, which is extreme. Like if I did a pedestrian level of service calculation for here, it would be the greatest delay you could ever have. But apparently everybody, or a lot of people, like waiting. So that's a trade-off worth debating. Sir?
When the Red Sox won the World Series, there was a group of about 20 to 40 students. They would hit the button and wait for the cuckoo, and then they'd run out in the intersection and shout, "Who's your dad?" And they did that for about 20 minutes. It was great. But they would leave the intersection.
And why were they happy? Because they took over the space for cars? Because I like what you're saying, that is sort of a metaphor for taking back the street to some degree. But I would just like to posit that maybe taking back the street can extend to more than just this little intersection. There was somebody else who had their hands.
I want a second thing. I do find it somewhat empowering crossing the day, and I would hate to see that. Because when I come home from vacation, I know that I've arrived in Northampton when I get to that intersection and people are crossing the day. To me, that's coming home. I happen to go through there a lot, so maybe
a quick question though: is it empowering because you're taking over the cars, or is it empowering because you finally have a place where you can take over the cars that otherwise dominate everything else?
It's a little wacky, and that's kind of a Northampton thing. There aren't many places. I've seen it in some places, but in the United States, there aren't a lot of intersections where you can do that.
Yeah.
I just need a time check. We do have to be out of here in 9 o'clock.
Yeah, I want to.
I wish you could. Well, anyway, to me, it'd be a shame if it just went to kind of a new urban, this regular intersection.
Right.
If you change it, I think you'd have to put something back that kind of brought the fun.
All right, let's going to take 2 more questions, then we're going to keep moving on here for time. You're second, but I haven't heard from you.
I want to say that in the center of that intersection, there often are projects that take place during that crossing period, and it's because everyone is moving at the same time. Right. It's quite. People run out to the center and they dance around or whatever. So it's a kind of, it makes it into a nice love space. But I have to say that I do hate waiting at this intersection. And I know the flow of cars so well that I will cross against the light, and I'll do it so well that I don't hold up any car at all. But I'm sorry, I have to confess, I'm very good at it. And also I'm very fast, so I can just run across. But as soon as I break that curve, everyone else who doesn't understand,
they follow and they get nailed.
They don't hold up the car. So that is, I hate waiting. So I go across.
So you're in both camps, and all right. And one more comment before we move on.
Obviously, this is a much loved intersection in certain ways because all of a sudden. The beep starts and a temporary space is created. It's like a transient experience where the whole intersection gets taken over. But I would say definitely be careful in toying with that because it's a unique Northampton experience. But your idea of narrowing it and making those crossing distances a little less, I would definitely encourage some exploration of
and that may actually make it come up more often, which will take care of both. And on that note, I'm moving on to King Street. So King Street. I don't think there's, I'm curious to see what the passions and the issues in the room are around King Street. My first comment about King Street as you head north is, again, this is so much wide space, and you get to the lovely Hotel Northampton. A mecca, a destination. It's kind of like a 5-foot sidewalk in front of it. It's just all of the space that is the grandeur of this hotel is dedicated to asphalt that most of the time is empty. I realize that some cars park here, but not that often, and the rest of that is just pavement. And it really, I cannot imagine, if I could find an old picture of the Hotel Northampton, that it was ever intended to look like the curb should be practically at the bottom of the stairs. As you continue up here, there's a lot of interesting interventions because there's a lot of curb cuts, but it's a fairly decent walking environment, at least until you get up to the church here. It starts to get a little bit harder the further you get up in this environment. The sidewalk's there, but basically what's starting to happen is the on-street parking starts to cut out. And that buffer from traffic goes away. And while there's still meters up here and they get cheaper and longer time limits, there's not as many cars that get parked there. This environment is neat because there's some good potential and some cool stores right up on the street front, which is nice for walkability, but there's a lot of parking lots that break it up, unlike Main Street. And that texture continues the further north you go. Other issues, at least in this stretch?
I just couldn't help but notice that you turned before the end of downtown, so I was just wondering if your study includes the intersection on the other side of the bridge.
No, we're pretty much stopping at the bridge, and so I didn't, talk in the last slide more for time about this profile, which is very similar to the other side. Did you have a particular comment on it, though?
downtown doesn't end until that intersection after the bridge. So I would say that it should be included. It's an important intersection, particularly for the people who live in Ward 3, but that is the real end of downtown, not where you ended.
Yeah, we've talked already about how you can make this experience under the bridge better. It's 2 lanes with tons of extra pavement, and then these poor cars that park under there and get out and you're like up against a wall. So, you know, there's a clear space where you might be able to widen out something and make it a little bit more manageable until you get to the signal on the other side.
We live off of King Street between Main we live off of King Street between Main and between Stop and Shop, right?
Yeah.
And to me, up here. And to me, the main characteristic of King Street, from my perspective at any rate, is that it's kind of traffic comes in off the highway, and it's used to this like very wide vision of the road. And that road in King Street continues that way, and it's giving drivers all of the same cues that they have as being on a highway. The width of it, the setback of the buildings, all of that stuff. So traffic is very few lights. Traffic is just drawn in until it reaches the intersection where Florence Savings Bank, and that is right there.
Yeah.
And then
this is Florence Savings.
That's Florence Savings Bank. So traffic, people are just flying down there, and there is just a drive in the driver that wants them to keep going, and they get continually more and more sort of frustrated as they go on. But there's still that pressure of having come off the highway or having come out of Hadley or whatever. So King Street is fundamentally different than Main Street. I think in Main Street, drivers tend to give up a little bit. They finally seeded it. So I would say, for me, the things that would really improve King Street would be visual cues that tell drivers that they're now in an environment that includes pedestrians. I don't think that you can zone it out. I think, like you said before, that it's more about how the lighting is constructed. I think that if you put mailboxes on the side of the road, that people would say, there's a mailbox there, that means that a person goes and puts mail in the mailbox. I think that if you had parking that went up further, that it would encourage people to use it. I also think that when the train station comes here, that it's going to fundamentally change Lower King Street.
Right.
And I think that when a usable bike connector gets built from the bike path that goes to Hadley to the bike path that goes out to Leeds to the bike path that goes up here, you're going to see people coming here riding bicycles down. And to me, the challenge of growth in Northampton is the challenge to extend the downtown, which is the thing that makes us different and special.
Right.
And we're not in the game to out West Springfield on Riverdale Road. We're in the game to out Northampton everybody else. So anything that you can do to extend those visual cues up King Street to say people walk here, people are here, because people are there. And that downtown real estate is valuable. So anything that will make Lower King Street more like downtown is really the thing that will bring more tax dollars to the city, that will improve the quality of life, that will enable us to invest in schools and police departments or whatever. But we're not going to get there by, being more of a Riverdale Road than Riverdale
Does
Road.
that vision jive with folks? You have your hand up. Does that seem to make sense to other folks about King Street?
Yeah.
Some of us have been crusading for that.
I think one of the interesting things about King Street in relation to what we were talking about earlier, and you were mentioning that putting up a signal for safe pedestrian crossing is kind of a last resort. And one thing that's really interesting is even as soon as I think where the Florence Savings Bank is, if you want to cross King Street, and that's still in sort of the pedestrian-friendly area, there's a signal, and the only easy or safe way to feel comfortable crossing is to wait for the signal, but it's kind of unclear if it'll ever work, and if you've lived here long enough, you know how it works, you can go for it. But that's particularly part of the problem, is that even as soon as there isn't nearly the same kind of knowledge base, or in terms of people trying to cross, and cars, like you're saying, like it's a different kind of street, and so they're not, you know, and because the signal is there, you know, you can't just start walking if you want. So I think that's another issue, is kind of how do you blend what we have in downtown and sort of what the social decorum is between cars and pedestrians and bikes too, which is another whole thing. How do you incorporate that so that that kind of downtown mentality can shift upward? You know, and it's different because it's a different space. And like,
You're saying a traffic signal, not a walk signal. It would be nice if there was actually an indicator when you could walk, because it's so complicated.
Yeah, I think a lot of the traffic
I mean,
signals don't have walk
Yeah, there's
indication,
no-
which
there's
the
no-
city is
well,
already
but
working
once,
on.
but I think like there is one at that street, but then once you get up, there isn't. But I'm just saying it just it like de-evolves, you know?
Right.
I was thinking that this general conversation sounds a little like preaching to the choir. Because everybody here kind of agrees with everybody, but I'm wondering, is there anyone here from the development community, or the Chamber of Commerce, or people who would have a different vision for, or think that King Street should evolve in a different way?
Well, I'll tell you what I've heard, although I've got a hand. Go first.
I don't want to speak specifically to development since I'm not part of it, but I'd like to just say that I think that the sidewalks, even on the part of King Street that's close to downtown, I think they're too narrow, and I think ways of expanding the pedestrian access is good. And I applaud that part of the King Street plan, which really does expand the proposed consensus plan that has a big expanded area for pedestrian transportation and so on. That's
Cool.
Yeah, I would say also that I haven't heard anybody from the Chamber or the development community say that they want King Street to compete with Riverdale Road, and I don't think that's the vision of anybody. What I would say is that, you know, the discussions that have taken place is that, I mean, I think there's general agreement that from Finn Street south, that area should be more like downtown, and that above that the uses, the commercial land uses are different than what we find closer to downtown, and that in the short term, those are not likely to change, and that we need to be able to accommodate them, and they are more automobile oriented. But that, given that also that the streetscape should also provide pedestrian safety and pedestrian amenities as well as bicycle.
After 60 years of Interstate Highway Act sprawling development throughout America, absolutely the vast majority of development and the easy development to do is auto-oriented development, which is why the attraction of up King Street of many of the uses you see to developers will continue, and why some of the zoning changes that have been talked about may not be compatible with, 500 parking spaces in front of my new Target that I'd like to stick on King Street. But, the more you talk about changing nature, the more you'll start to hear from other forms of developers. But it's true, it is more successful initially in these environments, and less so as you head, again, here's that next northern section up to Stop and Shop, where there's the end of the residential neighborhood, and it's very commercial. Good point. Again, in the back.
I want to follow up, because I thought you were having an interesting conversation with Terry this morning, where, Terry, you were talking about the need for transition. You can't just wave a magic wand and suddenly we have answers. So, and Jason, you were saying that there are ways to set an expectation or a direction through code changes, regulatory, new kinds of frameworks, that even though more traditional development will probably continue for a fairly long time, you could still start setting a kind of a course that will tap in maybe to what Terry was talking about in terms of transition. I just thought maybe the two of you could just talk about that a little more, because I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, what I was just simply saying this morning in this group was that if you have to accept that in an area like this, in the interim, there might be a Target or somebody wants to come in. At the very least, if we can make it so that Target, when it comes in, is built maybe closer, or its parking's on the side and the back, and that someday there's flexibility that that parking can be redeveloped and the building might be able to be reused, or that you could have, instead of the ground floor automobile showroom be only that use, you might be able to allow for it to flexibly be a nice restaurant that's walkable someday. If you still encourage basics about building placement maybe, or changes of use. One thing we talked about was being able to share parking or provide incentives so that down the road, future development doesn't necessarily need to provide parking on its own lot, but can share it, just determine where there's capacity, and maybe even help expand it on somebody else's land if you allow that flexibility. But you may inevitably wind up with a big box or two that is the easy form of development that happens. It does bring in tax base and jobs, but if we really try to change the nature of it, Home Depot has one in a location in Manhattan without any parking spaces. I mean, every chain that's out there, you know, your Friendlies is one of the more walkable urban types I've ever seen. They do have this capacity to think slightly differently in terms of their development. And if you encourage that, but maybe, you know, give and take a little bit, that's kind of what I was trying to suggest this morning.
That's Manhattan.
Yeah, well, we're not Manhattan, of course.
I'm sure you've heard that there's a lot of discussion that's taken place about biking on King Street and all the issues around curb cuts and whether it should be its own lane, or I don't know, just if you've had some thoughts or whether that's going to happen tomorrow more during the studio.
I think we're absolutely going to be looking at the cross-section of Main Street without doubt. And without doubt, we're going to try to look at the fact, King Street. And without doubt, we're going to look at the fact that King Street's daily volumes are in the range of all those Seattle streets that drop 3 lanes, and how workable that really might be from a modeling perspective. And if you're able to reduce that cross-section, or maybe even if you can't, where, at least in this corridor, can you think about other changes that make it work a little bit better? So that's some on-street parking maybe, where you might have a retail node or something. But I do believe that we're going to acknowledge the desire to get bikes along this corridor, and it's not Main Street. It is an environment where the cars are naturally going to probably be a little bit faster. It's a straight shot regardless of what we do without putting in speed bumps every 50 feet. They're going to be faster, and that's a good environment to protect the bicycle. And you might have enough right of way to have cycle tracks. I know that was in some report in the vision plan for cycle tracks along here. It's a great solution. On-street bicycle lanes are a cheaper, more short-term solution that can go into play. But I think in this corridor it makes a lot of sense to have a protected bicycle facility.
It's so sad that we can't keep going on that path that we've got, because we don't have the land there, but it's so nice to be able to go all the way to Taco Bell.
Yeah.
When you get on King Street, I got 2 flat tires by being there because there's all the units on the side. Right. It's just it's a nightmare.
And particularly at that point in north, it makes a lot of sense. And the back again, and then I need to, we're almost at the end, so that's all right. Go ahead.
This item before this going a little bit further south on King Street, I wanted to just explicitly draw some attention to the intersection there with the connection underneath the railroad tracks. I forget the name of that street, yes.
North.
That particular street is the connection between that section of North Street and King Street. It's the only legally permissible connection.
Right.
Obviously, there's quite a few other connections. And that particular intersection on King Street has no pedestrian lights. It's sort of catch can. And most of the time, when you actually can cross the street is when the people driving are finally committed to cross.
Right.
And they're extremely aggressive.
Right.
And usually you might get 1 car per light cycle that can actually turn left from that street onto King Street.
So you might know that this is the subject of a redesign already. And that particular design is temporarily on hold for this process. And looking at it out there today, what we've seen from that design, we might suggest some tweaks and modifications to do everything you're trying to make it do. I wanted to just quickly touch up further the corridor. And those specific comments and other thoughts, please, you know, mark up the paper in the front with your ideas. So if they're in your mind, and since we're at the end of the hour, if you have a second to do that afterwards. I just wanted to get all the way up the corridor to Bridge Street and, why am I blanking? Damon. So the environment here is still looking similar to the environment on the rest of the corridor, but the truth is these buildings are the densest residential in Northampton, and there's a bunch more over here just like it. And there's actually pedestrians trying to cross an intersection that has no indication, no crosswalks. This is really a gateway to the corridor. And we're going to look a little bit at what can happen. Mass Highway is ready to redesign this as well as the rest of Damon. And I'm guessing a Mass Highway design would be bigger. I'm guessing that it involves widening the right-of-way. And I'm hoping that it involves, you know, a crosswalk or two. We'll try to think about this a little bit creatively about how it might perform differently, especially acknowledging that from this point up, while the sidewalk is going to be an excellent thing to get you up to the big Y, for instance, and connect down, this is a very hard cross-section to change with the on-ramps. So we'll make the crossing of one on-ramp as safe as possible, I hope. But from this point down, the opportunities to change this cross-section are a little bit stronger. And so this intersection is a key gateway to what happens south of there, especially if we're really at 3 lanes and then it becomes 4 lanes north of there. Other thoughts, big quick concerns about this area?
Just quickly, because I know we have to end, but you may be preaching in the choir about south end of King Street, but you just put your finger on what I think is the real contested territory here, is that what happens south of that terrible intersection. Because for one thing, it's in play. The Cone Morgan plant is for sale. The old Hillendale Mall recently was sold. It's being redeveloped. There's a cement plant below. That's land that's up in play, and there are two very conflicting visions about it. And certainly the short-term vision is much more about business as usual, strip development. The long-term vision is more like what you talked about. And I think that's where we really need some help and some guidance about it.
This is, to me, an interesting spot because when we talk about how to build the kind of networks we're talking about, this may be a good concluding thought. We've already suggested that carrying the feeling of Main Street and the land uses of Main Street up onto King, past the hotel, maybe as far as Finn, I think it is, would be a really nice idea. That's recognizing is it's building upon a success. Well, oftentimes that can only go so far. We can only phase that kind of development so far. Many communities have really recognized that their strengths evolve out of these nodes. The node of your downtown, the node of a village square. There's whole cities that have built out urban village networks and interconnected them with transit and other higher speed ways to get by other modes. And I wonder if this isn't a place where a node could evolve, that it's still relatively fast, even on a bike or of course by car or on a bus, to get from here into downtown, but that because you're already slow getting through here, is it really that much of an imposition to be a little bit slow for a few hundred more feet and have this environment be changed as an actual commercial and residential node that services all the residences around here, that actually has an employment base that would go to lunch there, that may look a little bit different than this, that may actually have a little bit of internal connectivity here and there to change the nature of this neighborhood where people now jump down the embankment to get to the CVS. There's some opportunities here potentially as a small village node, and you know, that's what Florence is to some degree, just a pinch bigger. Last question, we should break it off.
Well, my biggest concern when we talk about slowing down traffic on the bigger corridors is that it's going to push traffic onto the secondary streets, like Market Street, State Street. That right now, those streets during rush hour are packed with cars, and that, you know, in terms of the congestion, if we're pushing more vehicles onto those streets, I'm trusting that you know what you're talking about, but I think that that's the concern you're going to hear from people if you start talking about slowing down.
Yes, it's a valid concern, as somebody else pointed. Well, this is preaching to the choir to some degree. You're all out here because you're interested. You're probably all thinking about change, and the people who are not in the room are more of the voting public who are going to be PO'd when things slow down. it is a community decision to think about change. The payoff of changing this may be huge in terms of tax base. It may alleviate a lot of other concerns, or it may not be. It may be no different than putting in a Target, though I'd argue it's probably a little more higher value than a Target. But yes, you bring up a very good point, and I think this is a tough discussion for a community. There are great places like Portsmouth and others throughout America that work well, that are walkable, that are just as successful, that people don't mind taking an extra 30 seconds or a minute driving through. It's really going to be that relative measure. And frankly, if you can get less people hopping in and out of these places by car and actually walking quickly and easily between them and parking once, we can just take that 10% of the traffic out of the equation anyways, and it'll be just as fast to drive through on a slower, skinnier street if we do our jobs right. All right, that's my last thought. I want to end at 9. I've gone past 9 just a pinch. Thank you, everybody. I don't know if Wayne, you had a quick concluding thought, but here's the bottom line. We have studio all day tomorrow in City Hall. We're going to be trying to draw this stuff up. We're first in council chambers in the morning, and then we're in the planning meeting room across on the second floor of City Hall in the afternoon. We're back here at 7 p.m. to sort of do a pinup session of what we've come up with, so give us your thoughts and comments then as well. We'll still take your concerns on the side as well.
And then Wednesday back here at 5 o'clock.
Wednesday at 5 is the big finale.